is a specific kind of pain that doesn't arrive like a storm. It arrives like a pause, a delayed reply, a softened tone, a sudden distance in someone who once felt warm in your hands. Nothing dramatic, nothing you can even prove. Just a subtle shift that makes your body start asking questions your mind can't answer. And that is what makes it so brutal. Because when someone pulls away without fully leaving, you don't get closure. You get confusion. You get silence that still breathes. You get a connection that looks alive from a distance, but up close it is starving. And if you have ever loved an avoidant person, you know exactly what that feels like. You start scanning every word, every pause, every change in energy. You tell yourself not to overthink it, but your nervous system is already ahead of you. Your chest tightens before your thoughts can catch up. Your cortisol rises. Your sleep gets lighter. Your mind starts performing emotional archaeology, searching through every interaction for proof that you still matter. Because deep down, the question is not just, do they love me? It becomes, am I the only one holding this? And sometimes, the answer is the one your body sensed before your heart was ready to admit it. Sometimes, an avoidant person is not fully with you because they are quietly keeping other emotional doors open. Not always in the obvious way. Not always with betrayal you can screenshot and send to your friends. Often it is more subtle than that. More psychological. More slippery. They keep people nearby the way some people keep emergency exits in sight. Just in case intimacy starts to feel too real. Just in case one bond begins to demand too much vulnerability. Just in case they need somewhere to run without ever having to call it running. And here is the brutal truth. The more you chase clarity from someone like this, the more valuable your certainty becomes to them, and the less available theirs becomes to you. That's the trap. You think if you love harder, explain better, stay calmer, become more understanding, they will finally relax into the connection. But if an avoidant person is keeping backup partners, your emotional labor does not solve the problem. It feeds it. Your consistency becomes the flaw beneath someone who is still looking for other exits. That is hard to hear, I know. Because part of you wants to believe they are just confused, just scared, just wounded. And maybe they are. But pain does not excuse patterns. Wounds do not magically become innocence just because they were born in childhood. You can have compassion for someone's nervous system and still refuse to be managed by it. And to understand this clearly, you have to stop looking only at their words and start looking at the architecture of their behavior. Avoidant attachment is not the absence of feeling. That is one of the biggest lies people tell themselves. Avoidants often feel deeply, sometimes too deeply. That is the problem. Closeness can activate their threat system. What looks like coldness is often overwhelm. Their amygdala reads dependency as danger. Their body starts preparing for engulfment before their conscious mind even names it. Their cortisol rises around too much emotional demand. Their dopamine spikes around distance, novelty, fantasy, control. So they do something that protects them in the short term and poisons intimacy in the long term. They split connection into portions. A little closeness here, a little validation there, a little desire in one place, a little safety in another. Not because they are always calculating in a cruel way, but because full emotional concentration on one person feels too exposing, too binding, too risky. So instead of building one deep bond, they create a network of regulated distance, a system, emotional insurance. That is the core concept, emotional insurance. Some people keep backup money because they fear instability. Some keep backup plans because they fear uncertainty. And some keep backup people because they fear the intensity of being truly known by one person. If this person gets too close, too important, too capable of hurting me, I need another source of attention, another source of possibility, another place to put my unmet self. Not necessarily because they don't care, but because they care and feel overwhelmed by the weight of it. And once you understand that, everything begins to look different. One clear sign is that they keep X's, flings, or almosts in a strangely active orbit. Not openly enough to call it commitment, not clearly enough to call it disrespect, just alive enough to remain useful. They still check stories, still respond late at night, still leave emotional windows cracked open with people they supposedly outgrew. You ask about it, and they make it sound harmless. Old history, no big deal, you're overreading it. But your body knows the difference between a closed chapter and a bookmarked one. A truly closed connection has gravity no longer pulling on the present. It may exist, but it does not vibrate with hidden access. An avoidant who is keeping backup partners often preserves these ghost connections because they offer something precious: low-risk intimacy, familiarity without full accountability, attention without the suffocation of commitment. They can dip into those bonds when they want reassurance, flirtation, or proof that they are still wanted, then step back before real emotional exposure begins. It is not always sexual. Sometimes it is more intimate than sex. Sometimes it is emotional availability they no longer give to you. And that is what hurts. You notice they can be deeply attentive to people who do not require much from them. A friend who lives far away. An ex who is just going through something. A person they claim is complicated but meaningless. Yet with you, the person actually trying to build something real, they become vague, tired, hard to reach. That contrast matters, because avoidants often reserve their most fluid warmth for connections that are safer precisely because they are less binding. Another sign is inconsistency that appears exactly when closeness deepens. In the beginning, they may be present, magnetic even, curious, intense in flashes. They text first. They open up just enough. They create the feeling of rare connection. And then, once emotional reality starts asking for steadiness, something shifts. They become busy, foggy, hard to pin down. Not fully gone, just intermittently available. This is where people confuse avoidance with loss of interest, but often it is not that simple. What is happening underneath is that your increasing importance is activating their alarm system. The bond is becoming real enough to threaten their illusion of self-sufficiency. So instead of deepening, they regulate by dispersing. They spread their emotional energy across multiple channels, so no single connection can fully claim them. If one person starts to feel too intimate, they unconsciously rebalance by leaning into someone else, flirting elsewhere, reviving an old thread, or becoming suddenly independent. Watch the timing. That is everything. Backup behavior does not always show up when things are cold. It often appears right after moments of closeness, after vulnerability, after tenderness, after a good weekend, after a conversation where you felt them soften. That is when they feel the pull of attachment most intensely, and that is when they may reach for another emotional outlet to restore distance inside themselves. The third sign is that they keep their options psychologically alive through ambiguity. They hate being cornered by clarity. Not because clarity is unfair, but because clarity creates emotional consequences. If they define the connection, they can no longer move freely without guilt. If they name you, they have to confront what they are doing with everyone else. If they promise anything real, they lose access to the fantasy that something better, safer, easier might still be waiting somewhere else. So they speak in half-language. They care about you, but they don't want labels right now. They say they are not ready for something serious, but they still want emotional access to you. They pull you close when you detach, then loosen their grip when you relax. They say things that sound intimate, but build nothing stable around those words. And this is not random. Ambiguity is a shelter for divided attachment. It allows them to receive loyalty without having to offer exclusivity of energy. You start living in the gray, and gray is exhausting. Because gray makes you negotiate with breadcrumbs. Gray makes you grateful for small doses of affection you would have once considered the bare minimum. Gray makes you overvalue moments that should have been a standard, not a miracle. This is how people lose themselves. Not in one catastrophic betrayal, but in repeated exposure to uncertainty dressed as depth. The fourth sign is that they seem unusually reactive when they sense you pulling away, even if they've been distant for weeks. This one confuses people the most, because it makes you think, see, they do care. And yes, they probably do. But caring is not the same as choosing. When an avoidant keeps backup partners, they often panic at the idea of losing supply, not just losing love. Supply of attention, supply of access, supply of possibility, supply of emotional regulation. Your presence helps stabilize parts of them they do not know how to stabilize alone. So when you stop reaching, stop reassuring, stop waiting in the same way, they feel the drop. Suddenly they text. Suddenly they miss you. Suddenly they are remembering your connection. Suddenly they are warmer, softer, more available. But notice what happens if you return too quickly. The intensity fades. Why? Because the threat was not your pain. The threat was your unavailability. The moment they feel sure they still have access to you, their nervous system relaxes and the pattern resumes. This is why so many people become trapped in cycles with avoidance. Not because the connection is fake, but because the reactivation of desire is tied to distance, not devotion. Your withdrawal creates dopamine. Your certainty lowers it. And until they become conscious of that pattern, they will confuse longing with love and freedom with emotional fragmentation. The fifth sign is quieter, but maybe the most revealing of all. They compartmentalize you. They do not fully integrate you into their life in the way someone does when they are building a future from wholeness. You may feel emotionally close in private, but strangely absent in the structure of their world. There is always some separation, some partition, some reason why you remain in a category instead of becoming part of a larger truth. This does not mean everyone who moves slowly is keeping backups. Not at all. Healthy pacing exists. Privacy exists. Caution exists. But compartmentalization feels different. It feels like being selectively included, deeply wanted in moments, but never fully placed. Like they want the experience of you without the reality of rearranging their life around what you mean. And people who keep backup partners often do this because full integration would force full choice. It would collapse the ambiguity. It would expose the side doors. It would make their divided emotional life visible. So they keep people in separate rooms and call that complexity. But your soul knows when it is being loved in fragments. Now, here is the part that changes everything. If you recognize yourself in this dynamic, your instinct may be to confront harder, explain better, prove your value more clearly, become more irresistible, more understanding, less needy. You may think the answer is to become the one they cannot lose. But that strategy is exactly what keeps you trapped. Because the more you audition for your place in someone's divided emotional economy, the more you confirm that your place is still being negotiated. And love should not feel like a silent competition against invisible people. Read that again in your bones. You do not heal this by becoming more convenient to abandon. You do not heal this by acting unbothered while your nervous system is drowning. You do not heal this by studying their trauma until you disappear inside it. Yes, they may be overwhelmed. Yes, their detachment may be protective, not malicious. Yes, they may reach for backup partners because one deep attachment feels like too much pressure on a system trained to equate closeness with danger. But if you keep offering deeper access to someone committed to partial presence, you are not practicing love. You are practicing self-erasure. And this is where the power dynamic begins to flip. Not when you play games, not when you become cold, not when you try to trigger jealousy. It flips when you stop feeding a pattern that survives on your emotional overfunctioning.
When you stop chasing, something strange happens inside an avoidant dynamic. The person who once felt secure in your loyalty starts to feel the silence they trained you to survive. They start reaching into the empty spaces where your reassurance used to be. They wonder why your energy feels different. They replay your absence in the same mind that once made you replay theirs. Not always because they have transformed. Sometimes just because the mirror has turned. And that mirror matters, because for the first time, they are the one feeling uncertainty. They are the one noticing the loss of access. They are the one experiencing your non-reactivity not as punishment, but as consequence. This is why grounded detachment is so powerful. Not dramatic detachment, not performative detachment, not detachment designed to manipulate. Grounded detachment. The kind that says, I can care and still leave. I can understand your wounds and still refuse your pattern. I can hold compassion without volunteering for confusion. I can miss you without returning to a version of myself that begged for clarity from someone investing in options. That energy changes everything. Because backup dynamics depend on one person staying emotionally overcommitted to ambiguity. The moment you stop doing that, the pattern loses oxygen. But let me warn you, this is the part where many people break. They pull away. The avoidant comes closer. The chemistry surges. The texts become tender. the old hope wakes up. And because your body has been starving, even a small return of warmth feels like rain after drought. Be careful. Temporary pursuit is not permanent change. Missing you is not the same as choosing you. Emotional intensity is not the same as emotional maturity. If they come back, do not just listen for longing. Listen for structure. Listen for ownership. Listen for evidence that they are no longer managing intimacy through divided attachment and hidden exits. If the behavior is the same, but the words are sweeter, the pattern is still alive. And if you ignore that, you will mistake re-entry for repair. That mistake is expensive. It costs time, self-trust, nervous system stability, identity. So this is the shift. You stop asking whether you are the chosen one in someone else's confusion, and you start asking whether this dynamic is worthy of the version of you that is finally waking up. Because your value was never supposed to be measured by how hard you could hold on while someone else kept one foot out the door. Your power is not in making an avoidant panic over losing you. Your power is in no longer needing that panic to prove your worth. That is freedom. That is the real glow-up no one talks about. When your self-worth rises, divided love starts to feel cheap. Ambiguity starts to feel loud. Mixed signals stop looking mysterious and start looking immature. You no longer romanticize emotional unavailability as depth. You no longer confuse being chosen occasionally with being cherished consistently. You no longer stay just because someone feels intense. You stay where things are whole. And if that means walking away from someone who did care, but not in a way that was safe for your heart, then that is not failure. That is self-respect becoming stronger than fantasy. You were never too much for wanting consistency. You were never too sensitive for noticing the split. You were never crazy for feeling the presence of other doors in a room where you were asked to stay loyal. Your body was reading the truth before your mind had language for it. So let this be the moment the fog breaks. Let this be the moment you stop calling emotional leftovers love. Let this be the moment you stop offering full devotion to someone distributing themselves in pieces. And let this be the moment you remember who becomes truly magnetic in the end. Not the person who begs to be fully chosen. The person who fully chooses themselves. That is the one they remember. That is the one they cannot easily replace. That is the one whose silence becomes unforgettable. And most importantly, that is the one who no longer waits in emotional half-light, hoping someone else will finally turn toward them with both hands open. No. Now you turn toward yourself, fully, without backup plans.